I have the great honor to be able to introduce Howard Garrett. Howie got his start in 1980 when he went to work with his brother Ken at the Center for Well Research, working on the Orca ID project. He's the president of Orca Network, a nonprofit started in 1996 focused on connecting whales and people in the Pacific Northwest. Howie is also now the board chair of the Center for Well Research. In 1995, Howie launched a campaign to return Toki to the Salish Sea. His primary area of interest is focused on the cultural capabilities of killer whales.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me this chance to say a few words about Ken. I have obviously never given any kind of talk like this before, so please bear with me. I kind of had to write it out because I want to cover a lot about Ken's life. I think Ken would agree that he dedicated his living years to studying and trying to help southern resident orcas and all orcas and all wildlife, ultimately. And that led him to do everything he could to protect and restore salmon. But I think the best way to talk about Ken is to let him talk about himself. So I'm going to play a short video here that was filmed in February 2022. And Ken knew that his days were numbered. We all did at that time. I think this is the last stand-up recorded talk that he ever gave. It's short, but very much to the point.
Sorry, pushing play.
Okay, I'm Ken Balcomb. I'm the founder and principal investigator of the Center for Whale Research. We founded this organization to study whales and report our findings to the government, to the public, and to conservation organizations who are interested in their long-term survival. In the 45 years that we've been studying these whales, we've found that the population initially was increasing following the capture era when they were sold to marine parks. About 50 plus were removed, and we had 70 remaining. The population gradually increased to about 100, and then it began a very steep decline, and it's had a series of slight increases and greater declines since then. So we're back to 72 whales right now, right where we started. But the composition is different. We don't have any babies for the past few years, and we're very concerned about their future. Now, as far as salmon, Chinook salmon, which are their primary food, we've seen fluctuations in that also. The human captures of salmon, or catches, in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s was in the United States part, Washington State, in the inshore waters, 500,000 Chinook salmon, 22 pounds each, on average, per year, taken out of this ecosystem. Probably twice that taken out of the Canadian ecosystem, which is just on an imaginary border between us and Canada. That population of salmon is now, or those populations are depleted. Half of them are already extinct. The other half are endangered or threatened with extinction. And they're way less numerous than they used to be. And these whales depend upon them for food. So we've seen huge variability in salmon, and we're getting behind salmon restoration efforts throughout the ecosystem. So why did we start the Big Salmon Ranch, and what are my hopes for its future? basically, I got tired of fighting the government and quasi-government agencies like the Bonneville Power Authority over ecosystem restoration and basically huge salmon producing habitats. The dams in the Columbia Snake River system have done the same that they did to the Elwha. They blocked the migrations of the fish. They can't spawn. They can't, the youngs that do get hatched are suffering high mortality in the dam reservoirs. The heat balance and the contaminants, you know, they just, basically salmon are going extinct in the Snake River system and commercially extinct, at least in the entire system. As far as sustaining the whales, it's just not there anymore. So I got tired of beating my head on that, and I came to an ecosystem where the Elwha dams have already been removed. We're already on our way to restoration. We just have to protect the river from exploitation. And that's what we're doing. And we also want to use this beautiful landscape as an educational opportunity for young people to visit, learn about what an ecosystem needs, learn about the whales, how the fish tie to the whales, how the whales tie to the universe. We're in need of a spiritual push here that nature can provide. So we want to make that available for young people, either by their visit or virtually. So let's see, what other questions do we have here? Does this give me hope for the future of salmon? As I said, yes. Does this give me hope? You know, this whole place gives me hope. It's still here. It's not destroyed. It's on its way to restoration in terms of the fish will again have access to the river and hopefully get into the numbers and sizes that they historically had. And what did the salmon and orcas mean to me personally? Everything. I mean, that's why I'm here, is to learn and teach and share their story. And it's part of the restoration of the planet that we all need to pay attention to. Climate change and COVID and wars and stuff are, they're human activities. They're not the natural system. And what we're trying to demonstrate here is this is what we really need. We don't need to have human foibles foisted upon Mother Earth. So we're back to nature. That's it.
So Ken majored in philosophy at UC Berkeley before he settled on zoology and transferred to UC Davis. Maybe he decided non-human animals were more interesting and could lead to more interesting work than human philosophies. Somehow he seems to have learned the value of having values, of moral integrity, of walking your talk, except Ken didn't really talk about his values that much. When he saw a job, a task, a challenge that he thought needed to be done, or when he envisioned one, when he dreamed up a great idea, he just did it. He had compassion for all living things, and he certainly was committed to doing the right thing for the whales and the natural world. And he always tried to do the right thing for people to the best of his ability. He was a visionary, ahead of his time, who created projects and missions in his imagination and made them into realities. And when he met whatever challenges he found, he met them head on. That's how his ethical gyroscope worked. If you get out of the Navy, for instance, and you have two job offers that are both huge challenges, but both also once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that you can't refuse, one to conduct a population survey of southern resident orcas for NOAA, and the other to do a photo ID study of humpbacks on a three-masted barkentine in the North Atlantic, you do both. And he did, for more than a dozen years. If you incur the wrath of the marine park industry and NOAA for accurately counting the whales in the southern resident population, you continue to accurately count the whales in the southern resident population anyway. If you see an old empty building in Friday Harbor that would be a great place for a whale museum, you make it into a whale museum. Or if you see another empty storefront by the ferry landing, you dream up and build the Orca Survey Outreach Office. Ken imagined and built whale information centers all over the world. He also did all the mundane work that had to be done for the big projects to function. If you have a fleet of old boats and vehicles that all need to be serviced constantly, new batteries, new tires, restarted, winterized every year, you do it. If the producers of a Hollywood movie about a whale stuck in a tank in Mexico City ask you to help find a better home for that whale, you find a way to get that whale back to its actual native habitat. Kelly and I were right alongside Ken the summer of 1993 while he researched every possible aspect of how to return a whale to its ocean home. He compiled a comprehensive bibliography and a list of every release of every whale or dolphin that had ever been released or escaped from captivity. He talked to every marine park owner, trainer, or capturer that he could find. Of course, he already knew every scientific finding about orca biology and natural history, and had thousands of hours on the water with southern residents, observing every move they made and reviewing thousands of high-res photos. So he applied that knowledge to that mission and got the job, and immediately got removed from that job. But the job, as he described it, eventually got done, except for finding Keiko's mom. Yeah, next slide. Let's see. Yeah. And if there's a southern resident orca stuck in a tank in Miami, and you know you can design a way to bring her home safely because you know she's a resilient survivor, and her natal habitat and her family will feel familiar to her and be therapeutic for her. You say that for her, knowing that will definitely incur the wrath of the park industry. Next. If a dozen beaked whales wash up on beaches at your feet in the Bahamas, and you see that the Navy is doing sonar exercises, you put it all together because you worked in Navy acoustics, and those beaked whales were the subjects of your study. So only you can tell that story. So you tell that story. If the Navy also blasts sonar in Harrow Strait as you watch and listen, while J-Pod scrambles for safety in shallow water, again at your feet, you tell that story. If a lonely young male from L-Pod is lost in Nootka Sound, and you know you can bring him back to his family safely just by leading him home, but first you have to ask permission from people who don't understand how to relate to an orca, you ask anyway, even though you don't expect an answer. If a 3-year-old female southern resident has her brains blown to mush by some kind of underwater detonation synchronous with Navy training exercises, you tell that story with your t-shirt if necessary. Ken was essential to 3 contentious years of Marine Mammal Commission meetings with oil executives and Navy officers. The final report to Congress in 2007 was a direct result of his first-hand documentation of acoustic harm to marine mammals. If satellite tags are injuring and possibly killing southern resident orcas, you may use the data, but you have to tell that story. Ken's advocacy on behalf of whales sometimes cost him professional relationships and government funding. But if 4 dams on the Snake River are killing fish that are desperately needed by southern residents so they can bring their babies to full term and nurse them to become reproductive adults, you tell that story, again, on your t-shirt, if necessary. If you have to sit through days of meetings at the Orca Recovery Task Force, even though you're not well, to try to tell the story that southern resident orcas are starving and the main thing they need is more Chinook salmon, you sit through it and you say it. And some of the governor's recommendations actually did promote salmon habitat restoration and protection. If you know deep in your soul that these orcas are episodically unable to find food, and that lack of sufficient Chinook salmon in their foraging habitat is the single most important thing for everyone to understand if we hope to ever bring them back to good population health, you tell that story. No fish, no blackfish. To say Ken spoke truth to power is an understatement. He spoke truth to everyone. If the removal of 2 dams and the restoration of the Elwha River provides a glimmer of hope to return salmon to the abundance needed for southern residents to survive, you tell that good news story, even if you have to document it from the bank of the Elwha to tell it. Ken chose the defense of whales and natural ecosystems over his personal self-interest. It was his mission, his job, his sacred obligation. Ken didn't talk about why he did it much because others might not understand and wouldn't see the job as sacred like he did. He just did it. If you see that our whole industrial global society needs to shift its thinking from an economic, human-centered view of the world to a more spiritual, ecological realization that we humans depend on a healthy, functioning natural world for life itself, you try to say that in the best way you can. About a year ago, Ken hired Michael Weiss to be the new CWR chief scientist, and he tapped Darren Croft to steer the ship, and he asked John Ford and John Durbin to be science advisors for CWR, and he and the board made me vice president, and he talked at length about his vision for CWR and for the Big Salmon Ranch. He talked to a lot of old friends in his final months, planning the future or just making shopping lists. Ken envisioned, built, maintained, and managed Orca Survey, a continuous, complete demographic and behavioral study of southern resident orcas since 1976, and left the Center for Whale Research in good shape and in good hands to continue doing research, education, and conservation for these whales. Good job, Ken. Thank you. And then he went down to the Elwha to watch the river flow. Thank you all very much.
Any questions for Howie?
Yes, any questions? I don't know what, but
Go ahead.
I'm game.
What river system was he talking about that's been restored?
The Elwha, in 2011 to 2014, 2 dams that had been there 100 years that absolutely blocked all fish passage starting from 5 miles from the mouth were torn down. Finally, it took decades, but they were, and the salmon are coming back. And the steelhead are an amazing success story. So the river is being restored. So the Elwha, if you don't know, is on the Olympic Peninsula, right across due south from us, across the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and in the Olympic mountain range. So it goes up into the pristine waters of the Olympic National Park. And now the salmon are back.
Need more?
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, there's a question coming.
Oh, was it?
Tell us something about Ken that nobody knows.
I'm gonna cover that one.
He was kind of a car freak.
Definitely gonna cover that.
Yeah, he liked old cars. Yeah, I think I better leave it at that.
Catch you later after the show.
We love you, Howard.